All right, 9. So let's take a look now at the second question that people asked for help with, which was number 13. So number 13 says, suppose the cube in question 8 has side lengths of x. Write the expression for the dimensions of the largest cone that fits inside this box. And what is the formula for the surface area of this cone? So if we take a quick look at question 8, right, it's just a cube with a cone inside of it. So I have gone ahead and drawn that shape over here. As you can see, I made a little mistake, so just ignore that little um, whatever zigzaggy line. Okay, so what we want to do then is we know that, we know that the question has a side length of all the cube sides are x, right? So the length, the width, and the height. Well, if the width across is x, that means the diameter of my circle is going to be x. So that means then that the radius of my circle, whoops, I haven't drawn that very well, but the radius of my circle then has to be a half of the diameter. So a radius of the circle is going to be 1/2 x. Now, if the cone fits exactly in the box, that means that the height of the cone is exactly the same as the height of the cube. So that means that the height then is going to be x. So I know that the radius is 1/2 x, and I know that the height is x. So that only leaves me to figure out my that only then leaves me to figure out my slant height. So I've got this lovely right angle triangle here. So to figure out the slant height then, I know that the slant height, so s squared, is going to equal the radius squared. So I'm just going to do radius squared plus height squared. So in this case, my radius is 1/2 x. And whoops, I forgot the x, 1/2 x. And my gosh, you can barely see that. Here, let me rewrite that. So my radius then is 1/2 x, and my height is x. So 1/2 x squared plus x squared. So remember back to our first unit, when you have a squared outside of the bracket, it goes with the half and it goes with the x. So I have a half squared times x squared plus x squared. So that half squared is a quarter, right? Because 1 squared and 2 squared. Because again, remember, so just like up above where the 2 went with everything, we still have a bracketed expression. So the 2 goes with the 1 and the 2 goes with the 2. So we have 1 squared is 1 and 2 squared is 4. So I have a quarter x squared plus 1x squared, and 1 plus 1/4 is 5/4 x squared. Well, that is the slant height squared. So my slant height then is going to equal the square root of 5/4 x squared. And just like here, where the square root went with the number, where the squared went with the number and the squared went with the x, the same is true here. So the square root goes with the 5/4, and the square root goes with the squared. Well, when you take the square root of a squared, you just get x, right? Because x times x is x squared. So we can just leave this like this, or we can simplify what we call the radical. And so this is the same thing as the square root of 5 over the square root of 4 times x, and the square root of 5 just stays because that doesn't, if you take the square root of 5, you get a long decimal answer, but we know that the square root of 4 is 2. So it's root 5 over 2x. So we're almost done. So what we have here these are the dimensions. So I'm just going to write that up at the top. So these are my dimensions. Right, I've got my radius, I've got my height, and I've got my slant height. So now I want to use this to calculate my surface area. So I'm going to come over here, and I know that my surface area is equal to the area of the circle plus the area of the lateral surface. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that. So my radius is 1/2 x. So I have 1/2 x again, and that is squared, plus pi times my radius, which is 1/2 x, plus, or sorry, times my slant height, which is √5 over 2x. So let's go ahead and simplify that. So I have pi. Now, again, 1/2 squared. So I have 1/2 squared and x squared. So I have x squared. And then here I have plus pi. And now I'm actually going to, when I multiply everything together, what I really end up with is 1/2 times the root of 5 over 2 times x times x. So all of these things are multiplied together. All right, let's keep going. So I have pi. So 1/2 squared. So the 1 squared is 1, and 2 squared is 4. And now over here, I can multiply my numbers together. So I get 1 times √5 is √5, and 2 times 2 is 4, and x times x is x squared. So now, normally I like to put the numbers in front. So I get 1/4 pi x squared plus the root of 5 over 4 pi x squared. And so now I'm done. So once I know what the length of my side is, I can put any side length in and calculate my surface area of a cone in a cube. So I'm just going to quickly go over this just in case I lost a few of you along the way. So first we had to calculate the dimensions, and we knew that the radius was half the diameter, and the diameter would be the length, the side length of the cube. So the radius was 1/2 x. We knew the height would be the height of the cube, so the height was x. Then we had to figure out the slant height. Well, we knew that our slant height squared is always equal to our radius squared plus our height squared. So I went ahead and I put in 1/2 x for the radius and x for the height. So I have 1/2 x all squared plus x squared. Well, 1/2 squared becomes 1/4. So I have 1/4 x squared plus 1x squared. And I know that a quarter plus 1 is 5/4. So now I have 5/4 x squared. And that was my slant height squared. So then I had to take the square root of that. Well, when you take the square root of that, it's literally like you take the square root of all of the pieces because they're all being multiplied or divided. So I can take the square root of 5, which is √5. I can take the square root of 4, and I can take the square root of x squared. And the square root of x squared is x, because the square root finds two numbers that when multiplied together make what you started with. So x times x is x squared. So now I take the square root of 5. That's some weird long decimal answer, so I'm just going to leave that as the square root. I take the square root of 4, which is 2, so I have √5 over 2x. And now I can go ahead and put all of that into my surface area formula. So I have pi r squared plus pi rs. So pi, my radius is 1/2 x, and so that's all going to be squared again. So pi, my radius, which is 1/2 x, and my slant height, which is √5 over 2x. So I have pi. So once again, the squared goes with everything. So it goes with the 1, it goes with the 2, and it goes with the x. Only because these are multiplied and divided. If they were being added, that would not be true. So I have 1 squared, which is 1, 2 squared, which is 4, and x squared, which is x squared. So now over here, I have pi times 1/2 times √5 over 2 times x times x. I just moved all the like things together. So I still have pi. I know that 1 times √5 is √5, and 2 times 2 is 4, so I have √5 over 4, and I know that x times x is x squared. So just now for mathematical convention, we normally put the numbers in the front. So we have 1/4 pi x squared plus √5 over 4 pi x squared. Hope that helps.